A candle does not struggle to light a room, it simply burns. There comes a stage in life when movement slows, but perception deepens. This is not an end. It is a transformation. Like a tree that sheds its leaves in autumn, you too are invited to let go of unnecessary burdens. This time is sacred. It is not meant to be rushed. It is not meant to be loud. It is meant to be real. The journey now is inward, towards stillness, toward clarity, towards softness that does not collapse and strength that does not shout. This talk is not about fixing you. You are not broken. It is about remembering what has always been there beneath the noise of ambition, roles, and responsibilities. Let us begin. There is a quiet wisdom in watching the early morning. Before the world has fully awakened, the light rises slowly, not with urgency, but with patience. The trees do not force their movement. The wind does not demand to be heard. Everything flows in harmony with itself, with time, with life. In the same way, your body in this stage of life invites a different kind of movement. It does not ask for speed or performance. It asks for presence. To move with the breath is to let the body and spirit find each other again. A woman once shared that after her husband passed, she found herself unable to sleep. The silence of the house grew heavy, and her body, once full of activity, now sat still in grief. It was not until she began a simple morning ritual, waking up at sunrise, sitting by the window, placing both hands over her heart and breathing gently, that the tension began to soften. She wasn't exercising in the traditional sense. She was remembering how to be with her body. This is the first act of care, to meet your body not as something to fix, as something to accompany. Like a dear friend you've walked with for decades, your body has carried joy, sorrow, fatigue, and love. And now it wants you to listen. Gentle movement that follows your breath, whether it is slow walking a few soft stretches or simply standing by the garden and inhaling the scent of morning, helps restore a deeper relationship with yourself. There's no need for targets or progress. In fact, progress at this stage is measured by how present you feel, not how far you walk. In many Eastern traditions, the breath is seen not just as air, but as life, force, ki, prana, or energy. Flows through the body like a quiet river, cleansing and balancing. When you move with your breath, you align with this river. You begin to feel lighter, not in the muscles, but in the spirit. And there is something sacred about moving slowly. A young person often rushes through life without seeing it. But you have earned the right to slow down, to notice the way the wind feels on your face, to stretch your hands and feel the memory of decades in your skin, to move not to become something, but to return to yourself. There was once an old craftsman who carved wooden statues for temples. When asked why his work was so graceful, he replied, "Because I wait until the wood speaks, then I cut." This is the wisdom of the breath. Wait until your body speaks, then move. And if your body cannot move as it once did, that too is fine. Even stillness, when done with awareness, becomes movement. Sit on a chair with your spine gently upright. Feel your chest rise and fall. Let your shoulders soften. This too is a dance of being alive. Emotional maturity grows as we learn to treat our own body with reverence. There is no room for harshness or frustration here. The body is no longer a servant to ambition. It is a temple of memory, grace, gentle resilience. Care for it by breathing with it. Move only as far as your breath allows. Let each motion be guided not by force, by attention. And remember, the smallest movement done with love holds more power than any fast action done with anxiety. So rise in the morning like the sun, slow, certain, without needing to rush. There are seasons in life when the house feels fuller. The children run through the rooms, laughter echoes from the kitchen, and every moment is stitched together by the presence of others. And then With time, the house changes. The silence becomes more frequent. Days stretch longer, evenings arrive earlier, and the absence that once felt peaceful now sometimes feels like emptiness. But solitude, when misunderstood, becomes loneliness, and when seen clearly, it becomes a sanctuary. There is a reason why sages, monks, and wise elders across cultures sought silence. It wasn't because they disliked others. It was because they understood that in quiet, the soul speaks. There is a voice inside you that cannot be heard when the television is on, when the phone is ringing, when the world is pulling you outward. That voice is soft, like a whisper behind the heart. It speaks of who you are, not what you've done, not what you've lost, but what you still carry. In solitude, you meet yourself again. There's a proverb that says, "Only in still water can you see your true reflection." If you are always reacting, always surrounded by noise, you cannot see clearly what you feel. But when the surface of life becomes still, your emotions rise to meet you like old friends. Perhaps grief or joy or regret, they all come and they pass like waves when given space. A man once told me that after retirement, he found himself pacing his home, trying to fill the silence. He rearranged furniture, watched endless news, even adopted 2 pets. But nothing eased the restlessness. It was only when he began to walk each evening in the park alone, without a phone, something began to shift. In the company of trees and wind, he began to hear his own heart. He didn't feel lonely anymore. He felt accompanied by the deeper part of himself he had forgotten. This is the power of solitude. It asks nothing of you but presence. There is emotional strength in being able to sit quietly, not needing to be entertained or validated. It is in these moments that self-respect is born. You no longer seek to prove yourself. You no longer need everyone to understand you. You find contentment in simply being. In relationships, this shift is profound. When you no longer fear being alone, you no longer cling. Love becomes freer, more generous. You stop expecting others to fill your emptiness. You meet them not from need, but from wholeness. Solitude teaches boundaries, not the kind that shut people out, but the kind that protect your peace. You learn to say no when something drains your energy. You learn to cherish your time like sacred space. And when someone does enter that space, you welcome them with grace, not resentment. The mind also benefits. In solitude, it untangles itself. Thoughts that felt overwhelming now become stories you can observe. You begin to see which thoughts are true and which are simply habits from the past. And from this clarity, forgiveness becomes possible. Compassion grows for yourself, for others. Spiritual traditions often speak of the inner room, a space inside each person that is untouched by age, memory, or fear. It is always there, waiting, but you can only enter it in silence. You do not need to escape your life to find this space. You can create it. A cup of tea in the afternoon without any distraction. A slow gaze out the window. A prayer whispered into the stillness. These are doors into the temple of solitude. And if, at times, the silence feels too heavy, remember, it is not empty. It holds your presence, your story, your becoming. It holds the quiet strength of someone who has lived, who has seen, who has endured, and who is still here. You are not alone in solitude. You are arriving home. There is a quiet kind of heaviness we sometimes carry in the later chapters of life, a weight that isn't always seen by others, but felt deep within the body. Breath, the spirit, it is the accumulation of years lived and moments stored, memories that linger, regrets that haven't yet dissolved, responsibilities long fulfilled but still remembered in the muscles. This heaviness is not shameful, it is human. But as seasons change, so too does the invitation. In youth, we are called to gather. In maturity, we are called to release, Letting go does not mean forgetting. It does not mean pretending something didn't hurt or that we weren't shaped by our experiences. Rather, it is the art of placing down what no longer needs to be carried. Imagine standing beside a river. In your hands you hold stones. Some are smooth and familiar, memories of love, old routines, laughter shared. Others are jagged, unspoken words, missed chances, wounds that never fully healed. You've carried these stones for decades, but the river does not ask for them. Life keeps flowing, gently urging you to loosen your grip. One elderly woman once told the story of how, after her sister passed away, she found herself holding on to old arguments that had never been resolved. The silence between them at the end was sharp. Even in her sister's absence, the weight remained. But then, sitting in her garden one afternoon, surrounded by the stillness of earth and sky, she suddenly realized the pain wasn't in the memory, it was in the attachment. And so she wrote a letter, not to be sent but to be released. With each word, she let go, not of the love, not of the truth, but of the need for a different past. To release is to respect your present self. It is an act of self-kindness, not denial. Often, we think we are honoring someone by holding on to the pain they caused us or the longing we still feel. But true honoring lies in peace. When you let go, you do not erase what happened. You transform it. You allow it to settle into the earth like fallen leaves, no longer clinging to the branch, but enriching the soil beneath you. In Eastern philosophy, there is a teaching that says, empty your cup and it will be filled. When our hearts are full of old emotion, resentment, guilt, fear, there is no space for new joy, new insight, new love. But when we pour out what has grown stagnant, life begins to flow again. This does not need to be dramatic. A gentle breath out, quiet evening of reflection, a whispered prayer. These are acts of release. There is also a deep connection between letting go and physical wellness. The body often stores what the mind cannot express. Shoulders tightened with old burdens, a stomach knotted from years of worry, a chest that forgets how to breathe fully. When the emotional knots are loosened, the body too begins to soften. A warm bath with intention, a slow walk with attention, a hand placed over the heart while breathing deeply. These simple acts can become rituals of surrender. Sometimes, people fear that if they let go, they will lose a part of themselves. But the truth is gentler than that. What you lose is not yourself, the illusion that you had to hold on so tightly in order to matter. Your worth is not in your memories, it is in your being. Right now, in this breath, letting go also restores clarity in relationships. When you are no longer tethered to old disappointments or unmet expectations, you can see others more clearly, not as versions of your past, but as they are in the present. This shift allows for forgiveness, also for firm boundaries. You begin to choose who gets access to your heart. You offer your time not out of duty, but from peace. You no longer need to explain yourself. Your life becomes your answer. There's a tree in the mountains that sheds all its leaves every winter without fail, no matter how golden or beautiful the foliage has been. It knows when it is time to release. It stands bare for months, exposed to wind and cold. But it does not fear this season. It trusts the cycle. Come spring, it blooms again, stronger, deeper rooted. So too are we called to shed, not all at once, not with force, but gently, with the same trust. There is no right way to let go, only your way. It may begin with a breath, a pause, or a tear. It may be supported by a conversation, a journal, a quiet moment in nature. It may take years, or it may happen in a single moment of deep recognition. But always it begins with self-compassion, with the soft, clear voice inside that says, you do not need to carry this anymore. And as you begin to release, you may notice that what remains is not emptiness, but space. Space for rest, space for simplicity, space for light to enter places long closed. You may find that you sleep more peacefully. Your body feels less guarded, that your relationships soften. Not because the past is erased, but because you are no longer clinging to it. And when the old memories visit, as they sometimes will, you can welcome them like old friends. You can smile. You can weep. You no longer need to bind yourself to them. You are no longer defined by the story. You are the witness, the soul who lived, who learned, who let go, and who now walks freely into each new day. In the gentle unfolding of life, we are constantly given opportunities to choose again, to respond with clarity instead of reaction, to meet our emotions not with resistance, but with understanding. This is where real maturity flowers, not in knowing more, but in needing less, in allowing space between feeling and action, in breathing, pausing, and then choosing how to meet the world. A man once shared that he had spent years reacting to his adult son with impatience, would clash over politics, over past choices, over silence that had grown too long. But one evening, while watching the flicker of a candle at the small shrine in his home, he realized something simple. He did not want to win arguments. He wanted peace. And so, the next time they spoke, he said less. He listened more. And when he did speak, it was from presence, not memory. This choice to respond, not react, is a sacred discipline. It is not weakness. It is strength refined by time. It is restraint born not from fear, from awareness. And it often begins with the breath. A single, quiet inhalation before responding can change everything. In that breath, there is wisdom. In that breath, there is power. When we are young, we often believe our words must prove something, that if we remain silent, we are defeated. But with age comes a deeper knowing that silence, when chosen, is a sign of mastery. Patience is not passivity, it is presence. And that true communication does not need to shout. It only needs to be sincere. Shift is deeply felt in relationships. When you learn to respond instead of react, you begin to see others more clearly, not as enemies or disappointments, but as human beings with their own stories, wounds, and limits. You start to choose your battles. More often, you choose none at all. Not because you've given up, but because you have woken up. This waking up leads to self-respect. You stop betraying your peace just to be heard. You stop entering conversations where no listening exists. You protect your time, your energy, your emotional ground. Like a mountain that does not chase the wind, you remain steady even when others are storming. This does not mean you become cold or distant. On the contrary, you become more compassionate. But the compassion is rooted in clarity. You no longer take things so personally. You no longer rush to fix or to please. You understand the limits of control. And in doing so, you gain real control over yourself. Quiet joy in this, in knowing you can feel deeply and still remain grounded. In learning that your emotions are waves, but you are the ocean. That your peace is not dependent on how others behave, but on how you meet each moment. With age, you are offered a great gift: perspective. You begin to see how many arguments were unnecessary, how many reactions came from your own pain, not the present moment. How many times silence would have spoken louder. And with this seeing comes release. A release of blame, a release of old identities, a release of the belief that your value lies in being right. What takes its place is stillness, a kind of quiet strength that others feel when they are near you, a soft steadiness that calms instead of provokes. And in that steadiness, relationships begin to heal, not through grand apologies or perfect words, but through consistent presence. You begin to show up differently. You listen without defensiveness. You speak without the need to dominate. You forgive more easily, not for them, but for yourself. Because peace is now your priority. With each choice to respond rather than react, you become a sanctuary not only for yourself, but for those around you. Even if others continue their chaos, you no longer enter the dance. You smile, you step aside, you protect your spirit, because you have learned, finally, that the most powerful response is often the gentlest one. And that real strength is not shown in how loudly you react, but in how quietly you remain whole. There is a common illusion that what draws a man in at first is what keeps him there. That if his eyes linger, if his voice lowers, if his attention stays momentarily fixed, it means something deeper is forming. But attraction, especially physical attraction, is not the same as emotional anchoring. What captures his gaze might not hold his heart. What stimulates the surface often bypasses the soul. Many relationships begin in fire, but burn out in silence. Not because the initial spark wasn't real, but because the foundation beneath it was hollow. A man may be captivated by a woman's appearance, the shape of her body, the sound of her laughter, the way she turns heads when she walks. These things are powerful, undeniably magnetic, but they are not what cause emotional attachment to take root. The truth is more subtle, and at times more uncomfortable to accept. A man does not truly bond with the most physically perfect woman. He bonds with the one who feels emotionally safe. Beauty may invite him closer, but emotional depth makes him stay. The modern world often glorifies surface-level attributes, filters, lighting, curated images. So much effort is spent trying to be seen, trying to be desired. But what a man longs for at a deeper level, often beyond even his own conscious awareness, is rest. Not the kind of rest where one escapes the world, but the kind where one returns to self. And that kind of rest only happens in the presence of emotional safety. A woman may look perfect, speak sweetly, and offer affection generously. If she lacks emotional consistency, if she reacts impulsively, punishes honesty, or cannot regulate her own storms, his system will detect instability and his emotional body will pull back. He might still stay physically. He might still speak politely. But inwardly, he is already retreating because his heart cannot risk vulnerability in an unpredictable space. Attachment theory, a field deeply rooted in psychology, reveals this dynamic clearly. Secure attachment forms when there is a stable, responsive, tuned emotional environment. This is not only true in infancy, it follows us into adulthood. In romantic relationships, emotional reliability becomes the invisible thread that either weaves two lives together or quietly frays them apart. A man begins to feel emotionally safe when he knows he won't be punished for telling the truth, when his silence won't be assumed as rejection, when a disagreement won't ignite a storm of accusations. Emotional safety is not about avoiding conflict. It is about trusting that when conflict arises, it will not destroy the connection. There was once a couple who had been together for years. From the outside, everything appeared perfect. Luxurious vacations, elegant photos, candlelit dinners. But the man began to emotionally detach, despite the seeming perfection. When asked why, he said something that many overlook. I never knew which version of her I would meet each day. One day she was radiant and kind, the next cold and accusatory. Her love was like weather, beautiful but unpredictable. He did not leave because he fell out of love. He left because his heart never felt truly safe. Because for a man to offer his vulnerability, there must be a sense that the emotional space will hold him, not drop him when he is no longer pleasing. Emotional maturity, then, is more magnetic than any physical form. It is the quiet discipline of not turning pain into punishment, of not making another person responsible for wounds they did not cause. It is the strength to feel deeply, but respond wisely. This kind of maturity creates a sanctuary, one where emotions are allowed but not weaponized, where needs are expressed, not demanded, where truth is welcomed, even when it's uncomfortable. In ancient traditions, there's a concept of inner harmony, when one's emotions, thoughts, and actions align in integrity. A woman who lives in this space becomes naturally attractive to a man's deeper instincts, not because she's trying to be irresistible, but because she has nothing to prove. Her emotional landscape is not a battlefield. It is a garden, and in that garden, he is not afraid to sit and simply be. This brings us to a quieter, yet more powerful truth. A woman who does not chase radiates self-respect, activates something very different in a man. Not lust, not convenience, but reverence. When a woman chases, whether with words, gestures, or subtle self-sacrifice, she may win attention, but she loses position. She begins to orbit his desires rather than remain rooted in her own dignity. And no matter how sincere her love is, the energy of pursuit often disturbs the energetic balance. Because healthy masculine energy is drawn to stillness, not to pursuit, does not mean a woman should become passive or withdrawn. But there is a quiet power in holding one's position, of not collapsing one's boundaries in order to be chosen. There is a kind of grace in allowing someone to come closer by their own will, not by emotional persuasion. In Eastern martial arts, there is a principle known as Wu Wei, the art of non-resistance or effortless action. It teaches that the strongest movements are those that do not force. The most enduring victories come not through pushing, but through presence. The same principle applies in relationships. When a woman embodies Wu Wei emotionally, she does not chase love, she attracts it through her centeredness. Imagine a river. It does not run after the boat. The boat follows the current because the river is steady. It is the flow of the river that guides the direction. In the same way, a woman rooted in self-respect and inner stillness becomes the guiding energy in the relationship, not through control, but through presence. There is a woman who once loved deeply. She gave, she sacrificed, she adjusted. Every time he pulled away, she stepped forward. Every time he grew distant, she tried harder. She read books, changed her habits, and even softened her voice. But he only withdrew further. Her efforts did not go unnoticed, but they felt weighty. Until one day, she stopped chasing. She returned to herself. She began to speak less and listen more to her own needs, to her own silence. And it was then, strangely, that he returned. Not because she changed him, because she changed herself. He said, "I don't know what's different. You just feel unshakable now." What he felt, couldn't articulate, was her energetic shift. She had moved from reaction to reflection, from seeking validation to embodying worth, and in doing so, she became magnetic, not for her actions, but for her essence. Men are instinctively drawn to women who do not negotiate their value, who do not perform to please, who can love deeply but do not compromise their self-respect in the name of closeness. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. And that alignment sends a powerful signal to a man's subconscious. Here stands someone who knows her worth. I must approach with care. It is a truth rarely spoken but deeply felt. When a man feels he must rise to meet you, rather than lower your standards to meet him, he attaches from admiration. And admiration is one of the deepest roots of lasting emotional connection. This shift does not require manipulation. It requires presence. It does not demand silence or detachment. It calls for intention and awareness. A woman who knows when to speak and when to stay silent, when to reach out and when to step back, is not playing games. She is attuned to energy, not impulse. She understands that timing in connection is everything. The ancient philosopher Lao Tzu once said, "He who stands on tiptoe is not steady." When a woman stands on tiptoe in a relationship, always reaching, always anticipating, she loses her balance. But when she stands grounded, centered in her values, she becomes immovable in the most graceful way. A man, whether he admits it or not, feels this. He may not speak in spiritual language, but his body, his instincts, and his spirit know when he is in the presence of a woman who holds herself with care. He feels it when she pauses before reacting, when she listens with curiosity, not just to him, but to her own intuition, when she does not collapse her standards for temporary affection. In those moments, she becomes unforgettable, not for what she gives, but for what she embodies. And it is that embodiment of calm strength, of emotional safety, of non-chasing energy, that quietly opens the deepest doors in a man, the ones he has kept sealed, even from himself. For he knows that in her presence, he is not required to perform. He is not measured by what he achieves or how often he pleases. He is simply invited to be, and in that being, to grow. And that is when attachment begins, not from fear of loss, not from pressure, from silent recognition. Here is someone I can trust with my truth. It is not loud. It is not immediate. It grows slowly, roots beneath the earth, unseen yet unshakable. A man may not even realize it is happening, but over time, he will find himself drawn to her in ways he cannot fully explain. Not for what she says, not for how she looks, for how he feels when he is with her. That feeling, that resonance, that emotional rest is not something he can buy, replicate, or replace. And so he returns, not out of neediness, but from reverence, because he has finally found something he did not know he was searching for. A space to become more of himself in the presence of someone who expects nothing, yet sees everything. There is something quietly profound about the way a garden grows when tended with care. It does not rush, it does not demand attention, yet it flourishes in its own time. The hands that prune the dry branches and water the soil each day are not hurried, they are present. In many ways, our inner world mirrors this garden. It needs tending, and in the later stages of life, when external achievements hold less pull and social obligations begin to thin, we are offered the rare opportunity to turn inward and care for the garden of our mind, our heart, and our spirit. There is a kind of nourishment that goes deeper than food. It comes from how we speak to ourselves when no one is listening. It is found in the quality of our thoughts, the stories we still carry, and the quiet rituals we practice each day. One doesn't need grand gestures to feel alive. It's the gentlest routines that hold the most healing power. A slow walk through the neighborhood at dusk, where each step feels like a conversation with the earth, sitting by the window with a cup of warm tea, watching the clouds drift in silence, writing a few lines in a journal, not for anyone else to read, but as a way to gently unburden the heart. In tending to this inner garden, emotional maturity begins to bloom. We stop judging ourselves for what we no longer do or for who we no longer are in the eyes of others. Instead, we begin to honor the wisdom that age has planted in us. The wrinkles on the face are not flaws, they are the lines of old laughter, traces of deep concern, the echo of tears shed in silence. The body may tire more quickly, but it also rests more deeply when we learn to listen to it with compassion. There was an older gentleman who once shared that each morning after waking, he would light a candle and sit in silence for 10 minutes, not meditating in any formal way, simply sitting, aware of his breath, the warmth of the flame, and the presence of his own being. He said that in those moments, he felt connected, not just to himself, but to something larger, something sacred. He called it his daily visit to the soul, and it was this simple act that helped him meet the challenges of aging, not with bitterness, with grace. The mind, when left untended, can become noisy with regret, fear, or restlessness. But when nourished with stillness, beauty, and kind reflection, it begins to settle. Like water in a bowl that has been stirred, it clears once it is left undisturbed. In that clarity, we begin to see what truly matters. We become less concerned with appearances and more attuned to essence. We start to notice how the simple act of sweeping the floor or folding clothes with care becomes a meditation in motion. Caring for the mind also means choosing what we allow to enter. The news, the opinions of others, constant stream of noise from the world, they can overwhelm our inner peace if not balanced. There is strength in choosing silence over stimulation, in reading something that uplifts the spirit rather than agitates the heart, in surrounding ourselves with voices, whether in person or in writing, that speak from wisdom, not from fear. And then there is the heart, often the part of ourselves most neglected in our earlier years. We may have spent decades caring for others, showing up for family, working through relationships, managing duties and roles. But now there is space, not just on the outside, but within. The heart, like the soil of a garden, can be enriched with kindness, with forgiveness, with joy. Forgiveness, especially, is a form of deep nourishment. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving ourselves for past decisions, for missed opportunities, for the moments when we were simply doing our best with what we knew. Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison slowly. It depletes. Forgiveness frees the inner landscape, making room for softness to return. One woman in her 70s described how, after many years of carrying resentment toward her younger self, for staying too long in a difficult marriage, for not pursuing her passions, she began to practice a simple ritual each night. Before sleep, she would place her hand on her heart and say aloud, "I was doing the best I could. I released myself." At first, it felt mechanical. Over time, it began to open something. The heaviness lessened, and she began to sleep more deeply, to smile more freely, to move through her days with more presence. Presence is the medicine of the heart. When we truly arrive in the moment, without clinging to the past or fearing the future, we find that nothing is missing. This doesn't mean life is perfect. It means life is whole as it is. And this wholeness brings peace. Boundaries, too, are an act of nourishment. In earlier years, we may have tolerated more than we should have, out of politeness, fear, or habit. But now we are invited to become more discerning, not to shut others out, but to protect the quiet that we've worked so hard to find. Saying no can be a form of saying yes to your peace, to your energy, to your priorities. Time becomes more precious, and how you spend it reflects how you care for yourself. The inner garden flourishes not because it is free from difficulty, but because it is tended with care, with patience, with honesty. There will be dry spells, weeds that return, moments of fatigue. But with each gentle return to yourself, with each breath taken consciously, each choice made with awareness, the soil becomes richer, the roots grow deeper, and the blooms, though perhaps fewer, carry the fragrance of wisdom. There is a beauty in simplicity that only becomes visible with age, the kind of beauty that doesn't shout, but hums quietly in the background. You see it in the way the sunlight filters through the curtains, in the warmth of a well-worn sweater, in the sound of your own footsteps echoing softly through a still home. These are not small things. They are everything. When you nourish your inner world, these moments begin to shine. And in this nourishment, life continues, not as a sprint, not even as a walk, as a stillness that moves, a presence that deepens, a quiet that heals. You no longer need to strive, you only need to tend to yourself, to your heart, to the sacred now. There is something profoundly liberating about releasing the idea that one's worth is tied to productivity. In the earlier chapters of life, We are measured by how much we do, how much we achieve, how much we can offer. But as time passes, comes an opening, a space where being matters more than doing. It is in this space that purpose reveals itself, not as a destination, but as a quality of presence. The question of purpose in later years often arises quietly, like a bird landing gently on a windowsill. What now? It seems to ask, what is my place in this world when I no longer hold the same roles or responsibilities? The answer, however, rarely arrives through thought. It comes through presence, through living each day not as something to conquer, as something to inhabit fully. There is a woman who rises each morning before the sun. She lights a small candle in her kitchen and prepares her tea. She stands at the sink, looking out at the first light touching the trees. She does not rush. She does not reach for her phone or turn on the television. This quiet moment is her way of saying, I am here. That small ritual is her purpose, not because it changes the world, but because it roots her in it. In truth, purpose in older age often becomes less about achievement and more about attention. It lives in how we notice the texture of the bread, the way a breeze feels on the skin, the sound of a grandchild's voice. It lives in the conversations we choose to have, the silences we allow, the laughter we don't hold back. It lives in presence. Presence is not something to be chased. It is something to be returned to, and it often requires slowing down, enough to see what has been overlooked, enough to appreciate the beauty that requires no explanation, enough to love without needing to hold. There is wisdom in no longer needing to prove. When we become more present, we become more available, not just to others, but to ourselves. We begin to hear our own thoughts more clearly. We begin to trust our instincts again. We remember what matters, and we let go of what never really did. Relationships also begin to shift. When we are no longer driven by the need to be needed, we can offer our presence without expectation. We visit not to rescue or fix, to accompany. We call not to be reassured, but simply to connect. We listen without interrupting. We speak without the need to convince. Simplicity deepens the bonds we share. There was an elder who kept a small garden behind her home. Each day, she would go out and water the plants, not because she needed the vegetables, but because it brought her into the rhythm of life. She said, I talk to the plants more than people now, and they talk back. In their own way, that's enough for me. She had found a companionship in stillness, a dialogue with the natural world that fed her spirit. Purpose running through the park, in this way, becomes more subtle. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't demand recognition. It simply fills the spaces we inhabit if we are awake to it. And perhaps that is the deeper invitation of aging, not to become someone new, but to become fully yourself, to allow all the years, all the joys and heart touches, all the wisdom and mistakes to settle into a kind of peaceful clarity, like a lake whose surface has finally stilled, revealing the depth beneath. You don't have to search for meaning as if it is hidden. You are the meaning, in the way you hold a loved one's hand, in the way you prepare a meal with care, in the way you laugh, cry, forgive, and simply as be. And if there are days when the purpose feels unclear, that too is natural. Purpose does not always take form. Sometimes it is simply being available to life as it is, without resistance, without agenda. That kind of openness is rare, and it is sacred. In your presence, others feel seen. In your stillness, others find calm. In your wisdom, others remember what truly matters. You don't need to say much. Your being says enough, and so you rise. You tend to your day. You move through your moments not with urgency, but with awareness. And in doing so, you fulfill your purpose, not by striving, but by embodying peace. Not by doing more, but by being here, fully and quietly alive. There is no rush. Life in this stage is not about speed or productivity. It is about depth. Like the roots of an old tree, your strength is no longer seen, but deeply felt. The more you accept what is, the lighter your heart becomes. Sit quietly. Let your shoulders soften. Breathe in gently. You are not forgotten. You are not late. You are precisely where you need to be. Let this season be soft. Let it be sacred. And let it be yours.